Hi everyone and welcome to the FPL Stats Fix with me, Tom Campbell, for Game Week 25. I should say straight away, I've been battling with a bit of illness recently, so apologies if my sound is a little bit throaty or croaky. I am on the mend. I know that some of the other content creators here on the channel have also been suffering, so hopefully we'll come through it soon and get better, but hopefully the video will still be interesting to you. It's going to be an expansion on last week's video, which I thought was a resounding success actually, where we looked at which players across each of the different teams had performed best in terms of actual points on average per game over the course of the season versus those that the Fix algorithm was actually predicting that they would have done. And now what we're going to do is actually look at a much more filtered or specific game week range, i.e. the last 6 game weeks, and see how each of those players from each of those teams have been performing, see whether or not they can give you a clue and an insight into players that you might be looking to bring in over the next few game weeks. Obviously, we're now approaching the exciting time where we've got double game weeks coming up. We've got blank game weeks. There's going to be an awful lot of need to plan to navigate you through. FantasyFootballFix.com has got you covered. So let's get into the video. Give this video a like, comment, subscribe, and let's see how the FantasyFootballFix.com suite of tools can help you select the players that are going to maximize your points returns over the next few game weeks. So for those of you who were watching the video last time that I was with you, we did look, as I said at the introduction, across all 20 teams in the Premier League against how they had performed right across the course of the season. I thought it was really interesting. There were some names in there that I wasn't actually expecting to see. But now what we're going to do is actually filter that down and look at just the last 6 game weeks. So what this should do is give more of an indication in terms of form. And basically what I'm trying to pull out here is which players have really stood out in terms of, during that specific game week range, who've actually returned the most points on average per game during that range. And from a FantasyFootballFix.com perspective, which players were actually expected to have returned. And quite often the two are one in the same, which is great. That gives confidence that the algorithm is working correctly, but also where it does differ, you might be able to get an insight into which players might have been expected to have returned more and for whatever reasons they didn't, and that could give you a clue in terms of identifying a great differential as we look ongoing into the next few game weeks of the season. So without messing around too much, we're going to look straight away. We're going to go through alphabetically as we did last time, and what I've done as well, I have pulled together a table, and I'll feature that in the video a little bit later to show you guys for each of those teams. Column 1 is going to show the actual points returns, and column 2 is the expected. So from an Arsenal perspective, I've got a cursor now as well, so hopefully you guys can see on screen when I'm talking about this. You will actually be able to see the information that I'm referring to. So from an Arsenal perspective, we featured this, or filtered this, I should say, game week 20 through to the end of the season, so just the last 6 in terms of minutes played. That should be 580 or 540, excuse me, would be the most. But from an total points returns, Kieran Tierney was the name last week, and indeed in terms of this reduced range, he's still the standout. So points is 6. He's averaged 6 points per game over the last period that we're looking at, and from an expected FPL return as well, it's 5. So if you were looking at an Arsenal player, and I'm not necessarily sure that you would do in terms of the immediate fixtures, because they do have not the most appealing, but there will be a time when they do double and they will feature in the blank game week, as we were expecting game week 27 to be confirmed. So Kieran Tierney would be the standout there in terms of the expected FPL points during the last 6 game weeks, and from an actual return at 6, which is actually super impressive. So when we move on to Villa, who've been massively impressive under Gerrard, they've obviously made some key signings as well. It's the same name that we were calling out last week in terms of Luca Dean. 5.1 million is such a great price point, guys. I really do think that you should be looking at this. And yes, they might not double, but actually, if you look at their upcoming fixtures right across a sort of long-term period, they really do lend themselves to someone that you'd be confident in picking up points in a single game week as well. So Lucas Dean is the standout there in terms of the actual points returned. If we filter it on expected points returned instead, he still tops the billing as well. I did include in my notes though as well that Jacob Ramsey because of this great price point in the midfield of 4.6 million, he could be somebody that you look at as an enabler as well. And similarly, a little bit more expensive, but Buendia is someone who we've talked about in previous videos as well. And generally, in terms of the expected points returns, Emi Buendia is someone who's really exciting there as well. So Aston Villa present an opportunity to really augment your squad with players who aren't going to break the bank, guys, at all. And who, in terms of the actual points that they are expected to have achieved over the last few game weeks and actually did return, there are a number of options, and Lucas Dean is absolutely the standout there. Moving on to Brighton. Now, Brighton aren't necessarily a team who we would look at in terms of game week 25. Obviously, game week 25 has already started when this video is actually going to go live, but they will be a team who you'll look at in terms of forthcoming doubles as well. So is still a team worth looking at. And McAllister in the midfield at 5.3 million is probably slightly surprisingly actually someone who really does stand out there. So you could do worse than look at him as well at 5.3 million. I do think in terms of the expected points as well, if I filter on that as well, that's when you start to see Cucurella come into the thinking as well. 5.1 million, quite a bit to spend for a Brighton defender there, but I actually think in terms of the likelihood or the avenue to points, you could do worse than look at Cucurella at fullback for Brighton. 5.1 million, as I said, expected points returns of 5 points per game. This is all filtered on per game, as I said, is really handy for a defender. And with an upcoming double as well, he will be someone that excites managers for sure. If we move on and have a very quick look at Brentford. Brentford, guys, not a team I'd be looking to target at all in terms of buying. In actual fact, the opposite. I'd be looking to target them. They're in dreadful run of form, and I really do think they are going to do well to avoid getting pulled into the relegation mix. I know they've got a lot of points at the moment from earlier good form at the beginning of the season, but that is long in the rearview mirror, I'm afraid. So Brentford, 3.5 points per game. Not terrible for Ivan Toney up front there, but not necessarily anything to get super excited about. And expected FPL points returns as well. Toney still tops that, but not someone I'd be looking at there, guys, at all. Burnley are going to be a team that feature in your thoughts, though, because from a fixture perspective, they've just got so many. They've just got such a backlog. Now, not all of them have been arranged yet, yes, but it is a team rather that you can start thinking about in terms of looking to bring in players into your squad. And look at Nick Pope here, 5.4 million, quite expensive for a goalkeeper, you could argue, but actually the actual points returns over the last two for Pope, because hadn't played many before that because Burnley just didn't seem to play, did they, over Christmas? But that's slightly inflated, 9.5. But I think the expected FPL returns of 5.92 is kind of more where you should be focusing your attention and your analytical thinking here. Somebody who I'm sure will be in a lot of teams, and it's going to be hard to argue against that, guys, in terms of targeting Burnley players. If you filter on expected FPL points as well, column second from the right here, you do then start to see the more traditional players here of Tarkowski and me coming into the thinking, and Roberts, who of course upset Matty Loughton owners, is somebody else in there. So the defensive assets are really where to focus, and Nick Pope is who the Fix algorithm is suggesting there, guys. If we move on to look at Chelsea, I found this really interesting, actually, that Ziyech is actually top of the pile at 7.6 or 7.7, I guess I should say, points returned in the last few game weeks, guys, and an expected point return of just over 5 as well. Minutes is the problem with Ziyech, and obviously Chelsea's fixtures at the moment, they don't have many upcoming. There will be, of course, one that features probably in game week 28, and they will come back into the thinking once that clears up and their commitments with the World Club Cup have been played out. But right now, Ziyech is the one who stands out. Probably not a team we want to spend too long on, as they're not going to be in people's thinking for the upcoming game week, certainly because they just simply don't have any games. So we'll move on there and look at Crystal Palace instead. Now, last week I mentioned that Conor Gallagher was the standout, if you remember on last week's video, guys. But actually, you can discount Butland here. He came in, did well, and was immediately dropped. So that's kind of a bit curious. But Edouard up front at 6.5 million, returning 7.5 points per game over the course of averaging over the course of the 314 minutes he's played per game. That's an amazing return for a forward, and the expected is actually not that far dissimilar, or not too dissimilar, I should say, at 6.2 million. So in terms of the forwards, you could do worse than think about Edouard. Yes, the fixtures will need to come into your thinking as well, but just in terms of how he's actually performed, Edouard, I was surprised to see that. Now, Oliseh is someone I think who is more exciting as well into that midfield. It's Gallagher's kind of conspicuous by his absence here, so might be just something to bear in mind. Maybe a change of system that they've factored in some returning players like Oliseh. Will Hughes has come into the midfield as well, but certainly from expected points returns as well. We can just change here. Gallagher does then feature if we change it there, so that's kind of encouraging if you do already have him. But Edouard, I do think is the standout here from a Crystal Palace perspective. Now, Everton is super difficult to predict, guys, because obviously they've got their new manager in Frank Lampard. He's had a great start in the FA Cup with the thumping win against Brentford, but we don't know how they're going to set up. He's obviously brought Dele Alli and Donny van de Beek into the team as well. Dominic Calvert-Lewin coming back. You've also got Richarlison, who was very impressive in the last game as well. So kind of difficult to know exactly how they're going to be set up. The next 3 game weeks, and I'm including game week 25 in that, are fantastic. But if we filter on points, you've got some curious names here. You've got Gordon at 4.5 million. Richarlison, as I say, is someone who does excite me for this sort of limited period as well. But the expected FPL points as well gives a kind of mix here. You've got Godfrey, I think is now actually battling injury as well. Calvert-Lewin, as I mentioned, is back in the thinking as well. Gordon, but as I say, there are some more question marks over Everton, I would say, right now in terms of team selection, how they're going to set up. So probably a team that we'll come back to in the next few game weeks once Lampard's actually had a chance to figure out how he wants to set up. So probably not one to focus on right now. Moving on and looking at Leeds instead, or the next team, I should say. Now, Jack Harrison at 5.5 million. These numbers are awesome, but obviously it had that kind of one-off game, which is going to cause that big spike there. If I do expected FPL point return instead, yes, he's still up there because the quality of the chances that he had in that particular game was still good. But I think actually the name Rafinha is really where you're going to focus, guys. And yes, they are going to be a team that we're expecting to feature in the blank game week upcoming. So Rafinha, it has been confirmed, I believe, in Bielsa's press conference that he is available at the moment. So there was a doubt following the last international break that Rafinha had picked up a knock. Those doubts have been allayed, I believe. So Rafinha, 5.43 expected points returned is still very, very acceptable for a 6.6 million midfielder. Disappointing returns at 3.3, but that's probably indicative of how Leeds have performed. I still think he's where to focus on if you're looking at Leeds assets ongoing. No one else really excites me there. Now, Leicester have been in abject form. There is some rumblings of discontent in relation to Brendan Rodgers. Obviously, they are playing at Anfield in game week 24. Apologies if I've been saying game week 25, but the current game week when this video goes out. So Leicester are due to be travelling to Anfield and not expecting anything other than a resounding home win. If I'm honest there, guys, they have not been good. They were resoundingly beaten or thoroughly beaten by Nottingham Forest in the FA Cup recently. So whilst there are some encouraging points returns here from Daka, who when he plays up front does look like quite the prospect, and the expected FPL returns as well back that up as well. Minutes you wouldn't be confident of, and there does seem to be a bit of concern there in the Leicester ranks. So not a team I would be targeting, guys, right now. Liverpool, obviously, we're expecting to have lots of coverage in this team already, bearing in mind how awesome they've been over a prolonged period. And we know that Mo Salah is very much back in the thinking now, following the AFCON having played out. Yes, his team did lose in the final, but he's already back in training. I'm recording this on Tuesday. He's already back in training. Klopp's already mentioned that he is available to play some part in the game, as I said, against Leicester City. So he is very much back in the thought process now. So Mo Salah will be coming back into people's teams very, very soon. But if we look outside of that for a moment, Andy Robertson here, in terms of his last 2 games that he's played, 11.5 point return on average over those 2 games. Expected FPL returns of 8 points per game as well. 7.1 million is a lot to spend on a defender, but actually, if you think about the role he's playing, Andy Robertson's really going to come into the thinking here and be someone I would be very much advocating that people look at getting into their squads ongoing. We just filtered that on expected FPL. Just gives you an idea as well in terms of the what we're going to be welcoming back into our teams in terms of Mo Salah coming back into the fray. And look at that drop off there from 9 and 8 for Salah and Robertson respective down to Mane at 5.7. So yeah, really encouraging signs, and Robertson would be someone I would really be looking and encouraging managers to start thinking about. If we just take Liverpool off and look at Man City now, another team was quite difficult to predict where the points are coming from. Mahrez is someone who, when it is selected, just does fantastically well. Obviously, the range I'm looking at, he's only played the one game here and did fantastically in that. But I think it's probably more reasonable to focus in on Kevin De Bruyne here. 7.25 million here on the right-hand side. You can see, 7.25 points per game, I should say. I mean, if you could guarantee a return of around 7 points per game, you'd be just thrilled with that over the course of the season. And the expected FPL returns here of sort of 6 or sort of touching 6.5, I guess, is really encouraging as well. So it's an absolute fortune to expend on De Bruyne at 12.2 million. But outside of the defensive assets, which we talked about last week in terms of Laporte and obviously Cancelo, who is relatively ubiquitous in everyone's teams, I should say, De Bruyne does still sort of back up that he is a genuine bona fide FPL asset ongoing. Yes, you pay an awful lot of money, but the returns for him and expected returns are very, very consistent. From a Man United perspective, gosh, what a team to try and make head nor tail of for this. Now, Bruno Fernandes seems to be more effective when Cristiano Ronaldo is not available or not selected. These numbers are obviously going to reflect when that was the case. 6.75 points returned in the period versus a expected return of 6.4. Give or take, super consistent between the two. Bruno Fernandes gets points, the role that he has in the team, whether or not it's a slightly deeper one, alongside they're trying to play Scott McTominay in the holding midfield role at the moment, or whether or not it's playing in a more advanced role, he does still get points from an FPL perspective. 11.7 million, upcoming double. It's hard to argue against Bruno Fernandes as being a viable pick, I should say. If I filter this on expected points as well, you see the drop off there. But Luke Shaw, we know that Alex Tellers at the moment has got COVID, so the security of his selection at 5 million is, you would think, stronger than had that not been the case. I don't think there's massive faith though in the Man United defense, if I'm honest. So really hard to argue for many places in your team being spent on Man United, if I'm honest. David De Gea, we must sort of talk about briefly, if I just scroll down here, because with the upcoming double and the security of selection, he's been outstanding for United in what's been a poor season for them, really. But even if you look at the points return, 3.8 versus 3.7 expected, it's not actually that good. Yes, they got an upcoming double, but Man United just aren't a team that inspires a whole lot of confidence, is my take from reading these stats. The numbers aren't super high, and the team doesn't look to be playing particularly well. They crashed out of the FA Cup. Yes, it was a game in which they should have gone through if they converted their chances, but the numbers aren't suggesting that Man United have much to recommend them right now. Newcastle, similar to Everton in the respect that they've brought in new players that we need to understand how they're going to be embedded in the squad. Jonjo Shelvey being top of the points return sort of tells you where they're at. They're not really a team I'd be looking to spend too much time, focus, money on right now. If I'm honest, 6 points is fine to be returned, but you wouldn't want to be spending 5.3 million on Jonjo Shelvey in the midfield, I would venture. So I wouldn't necessarily be spending too much time on thinking about them. Expected points returns for Matt Target in that one game of 5 points, is fine, but very small sample size. So I would move on from Newcastle. Norwich, similarly, look, they have one standout here in Sargent up front, who has been impressive in terms of the points return. 6 points per game is great. 3.8 or approaching 4 is absolutely fine. But whether or not you'd be wanting to spend 5.4 million on a Norwich striker, I wouldn't be convinced about, despite their upturn in performance. So he would be the one standout there if you were looking to invest in Norwich, but not super strong recommendation there, I would suggest. From a Southampton perspective, James Ward-Prowse is the standout here. I've just filtered there on the right-hand side. 6 points per game for a 6.3 million midfielder is great. Touching that 4 points expected FPL points returns as well. He is sort of someone who flies perennially under the radar, I would suggest, and it is just a super reliable asset. So as and when Southampton's fixtures ease in the upcoming period, he could be someone to be interested in and start taking a look at as well. I do want to mention Brozier as well. So it's sort of very, very similar between expected and actual points returns here. It's this price point of 5.2 million. And if you're on wildcard, Brozier is expected to have recovered from the knee knock that he took in the FA Cup recently. So he could become a really useful enabler there. And whether or not you're going to play him or whether or not you're going to be benching him, I don't think it actually particularly matters right now. At that price point, he is going to be someone who really does enable moves elsewhere in the squad. So those are the two there from a Southampton perspective. From a Tottenham perspective, now, obviously they've welcomed back Heung-min Son into the team. They did that over the FA Cup win, and they were very good in that FA Cup win, actually. And you can see Bergwijn here. Yes, he had that great performance, didn't he? In the, I think it was the Leicester game. Less convinced on the minutes for him. So whilst he's a reasonable price at 5.9 million, obviously the focus is going to be on Son and Kane. And the numbers really do support inclusion of either of those. I think you'd be hard pushed to argue for both of those, but average return of 6 for Son and 5.25 for Kane versus expected of around 7 and around 6 for Son and Kane respectively. You know, there's a lot to recommend them. 10.6 versus 12.3 million. Yes, there's a significant price differential between the two, but in terms of the numbers that support those, I really like the suggestion that Tottenham have actually found some form under Conte, and they seem to be playing with carefree abandon now and actually being able to fashion some chances. And they put Brighton to the sword pretty effectively, I thought, in the cup game. So Son and Kane would definitely be the ones to focus on, somewhat unremarkably, I should say. My personal preference, though, is, and just eye test observation more than stats, I really do think Kane has started to hit his straps now. So it could be someone to look at. Yes, he's a fortune, but I do think it would be worthwhile. Looking at Watford, who are now under the management of Roy Hodgson, as we know. This I did find quite interesting, actually. It's Ben Foster who stands out here. 4.1 million. We know they've got upcoming doubles as well. He does seem to be the preferred number one for Hodgson based on that single game when they kept a clean sheet at Burnley. So in terms of an enabler within the squad and someone who you can look to make use of in your doubles if you're on wildcard or not, definitely think that Foster is a great shout there at just 4.1 million. Kamara, I mean, let's not belabor that point too much. If we look at the expected FPL points returns as well, we're not seeing anything here in terms of, you know, the likes of Dennis or King, are we? So yeah, it's disappointing for people who invested, myself included, but Foster definitely suggests that there's merit in keeping him. Moving on to West Ham. Now there's just one name here in terms of who leaps out, and it's Jared Bowen. Scored again. I didn't actually think he looked great against Kidderminster. I thought Kidderminster were brilliant in the weekend, but he scored again. He does play really advanced on that right-hand side as well. 8.8 points on average over the last 5 or 6 game weeks is just fantastic. We've seen now how that compares to his peers in this cohort. It's a great return, and it's not being dwarfed by the expected, around 7.5 as well. So Jared Bowen, he's still comparatively cheap at 6.9 million if you don't already have him. But even if you do, it's someone that I would not be looking to get rid of right now. He really does stand out there. And from a West Ham perspective, he is streets ahead of everyone else in terms of what the stats are saying. Now, from a Wolves perspective, let's filter this on points. I found this really interesting. You've got João Moutinho there, 4.9 million. Not a name I was expecting to see at all. Now, the quality of the XG and what have you is going to be low, but we know that he does hoover up bonus points when he in these low-scoring games. So, completely under the radar pick there. 4.8 or around about 5 as well from the expected points returns. Maybe that's someone who is flying completely under the radar. Now, Ait Nouri as well. Apologies if I've butchered that pronunciation, but he's someone at 4.3 million who I think a lot of players are looking at, managers are looking at bringing in potentially because of that price point and the fact that he is returning impressively in terms of the total points return, 6.5 on average versus an expected of 5.8. We just need to be a bit wary there. There is some rotation selection. Johnny is now back in contention, I believe. So that could scupper plans. But at that price point, it's really, really a low risk selection. There would be someone to be enthusiastic about. So I did mention that I did have this table, so I'm just going to flash this up on screen. What I've done here, so column C just shows the overall most points per game from these different teams. And I've just highlighted the ones that really stand out there in that column versus the expected as well. So these are the names that we've gone through, and I just thought if you wanted to take a pause of that screenshot, you can then see it presented quite nicely as a one-off selection. So that about concludes it for today's video. Slightly shorter, I believe. Really enjoyed putting it together, and hopefully there are some names there that weren't in your thinking, some that maybe were, and you've got that confirmation now that actually these are players that you can look to really target with some degree of confidence in terms of the stats and what they're actually saying for you. So let me know in the comments below whether or not this has been helpful. We'll be back with you for another stats fix, more traditional one next week. Looking forward to that one, getting back to some degree of normality when we will actually have fixtures coming thick and fast. But for now, it's been a pleasure recording this for you. Do subscribe to fantasyfootballfix.com. Smash a like on the video, subscribe to our channel. Get down into the comments, let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, etc. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.